Welcome to the Mama Stay Fit podcast, Birth Story Friday. In this birth story, Victoria is going to be sharing her epidural hospital birth story, where her baby did end up going to the NICU for meconium aspiration. But more importantly, her story is about her postpartum anxiety and depression that she had after birth and how she found using medication was very helpful for her. Welcome to the Mama Stay Fit podcast. This is Gina, perinatal fitness trainer and birth doula.
And this is Roxanne, labor and delivery nurse and student midwife.
And this is the Mama Stay Fit podcast, where we empower you on your prenatal fitness, birth, and postpartum return to fitness journey.
Our podcast shares how to move throughout your pregnancy to stay strong and comfortable. Pain is not a requirement of pregnancy. Understand the science of birth and how to approach recovery after birth.
We share our personal experiences as mothers navigating the stage of lives, plus our professional expertise as birth workers and fitness professionals.
Our goal is to help you feel confident as you navigate the perinatal timeframe for an empowering pregnancy, positive birth, and postpartum journey.
We are glad to have you with us on this journey and that you've chosen us to support you.
In Victoria's story, she talks a lot about her postpartum journey, navigating postpartum anxiety and depression with her baby who had colic and was causing her a lot of stress and affecting her mood and her sleep. And all of these stressors can actually increase the risk of postpartum anxiety and depression by itself, but she also experienced anxiety outside of pregnancy, which increases it even more. Postpartum anxiety affects 11 to 21% of people in the postpartum period. It can occur during pregnancy, postpartum, for up to a year that it can develop. So you can be fine for the first couple of months and it can develop like later on in that postpartum journey, just depending on how you're navigating that postpartum. Postpartum anxiety can be treated effectively with medication. So in Victoria's case, she went on medication and it was very helpful for her at treating her anxiety, and she's still on it today. There are medications that you can take and still breastfeed your baby. So this is probably one of the biggest concerns that people have with going on medication for postpartum anxiety and depression, is that they're afraid they will not be able to still breastfeed their baby if that's what they're wanting. And there are options available that you can still safely breastfeed your baby based off of research and be treated for those postpartum anxiety and depression mood disorders. There is a lot of stigma associated with postpartum mood disorders where people don't want to talk about them, or they feel like it is their fault that they develop this, and that is not the case. There are some risk factors that can potentially increase the likelihood of it happening, especially if you have a history of anxiety or depression or some sort of mood disorders, or you're having a lot life stressors. These are risk factors that can increase it from happening, but you could have the best support system in the world and it could still happen to you. It's not your fault if it develops, but seeking treatment can be really beneficial for you.
So for myself personally, after my second pregnancy, I developed postpartum OCD, which probably really stemmed from a lot of prenatal anxiety that I had. Before my son, I had 2 recurrent miscarriages, so I had 2 back-to-back pregnancy losses, and then was pretty anxious throughout the entire pregnancy. And that pretty much just continued into the postpartum realm as well. And I was finding myself having like panic attacks and being like very anxious doing things. And the intrusive thoughts were like really overwhelming for me. So the incident that really let me know that something was wrong and that this was not normal postpartum mood swings and behavior was we were at an aquarium and there was an open tank over the sharks, and you can go up these stairs to go over. And I had to sit down and clutch onto my baby because I was afraid someone was going to take him and throw him in the shark tank. And I started going over all the different scenarios of what I would do if that happened. Essentially just was immobile and couldn't move thinking about this. And it was just completely overwhelming me. And I realized that this was probably not a normal behavior. I don't think most people have those level of intensity of intrusive thoughts. And so I ended up seeking out a perinatal mental health specialist to do talk therapy with. And we went over a bunch of different strategies to kind of identify what was real and what was not real. And she really helped me develop a lot of coping strategies to kind of overcome this. And so I personally did not go on medication, but I found the therapy to be really beneficial for me. And then just as time went on, I was able to identify this is an intrusive thought and this is not a realistic thing that is going to happen. And then the things that I knew had a possibility, I was able to develop an idea of what I could do to help mitigate it. And that kind of helped me out a lot. So I found therapy to be super beneficial for me. And so whatever kind of helps you postpartum to deal with these huge changes that are happening within your body, like hormone levels, and then within your life, like you just added a new person to your family, either therapy. I'm a big advocate for like everyone seeking therapy if possible. And like we have tons of virtual options as well to connect with therapists as well if you find that like childcare is an issue for you. There's also in-person therapists that you can work with. There's always that option of medication. If you're concerned about whether or not the medication is going to affect your ability to breastfeed, like discussing that with your provider or whoever is prescribing you that medication can be really beneficial as well to go over the safety and like whether or not you can continue to breastfeed on this medication. But in some instances, it may be better for you to be on the medication as opposed to breastfeed as well, depending on the severity of your diagnosis. So we have several episodes in our podcast that we'll link below that do talk about postpartum psychosis and discussing perinatal mood disorders with a therapist as well. So we'll link those in the show notes if you are interested in listening to those stories. Welcome to the Mama Stay Fit podcast. Today we have Birth Story Friday with Victoria, who's going to be sharing her birth story. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on.
So tell us about your pregnancy. How was your pregnancy? What did you do to prepare for birth?
Yeah, good question. My pregnancy was really good, actually. I loved being pregnant. So I'm one of those people that I have to have a plan for everything. So I need to know details about everything. I need to know all of the information. So I dove right in and just learned everything about everything. I read all the books. I listened to podcasts 24/7. That's what I would do driving to work, listen to a birth podcast, driving home, birth podcast, anytime I'm listening to a podcast or a book or something. So I was taking in all the information. I listened to y'all's podcast. I listened to Evidence-Based Birth. That was a really good one. Lots of information. They also have a website that has a lot of good articles and research that I found really helpful preparing. I listened to the birth hour, just birth stories all the time. So yeah, honestly, listening to all the birth stories, doing some research, I felt pretty prepared. I also took the Mama Natural birth course because I was planning an unmedicated birth. And I felt like it was helpful, but I felt like I had known most of the information just with researching and everything. But I did still think it was helpful. And then I also did hypnobabies because I wanted to do hypnobirthing when I was in labor. So yeah, pregnancy was good. I don't think I had any issues during pregnancy. Yeah, it was good. I like being pregnant.
And I think you said you took a few of our webinars, like our pelvic floor prep one and our pushing webinar too.
I did. Yeah, I took those toward the end. Those were super helpful, especially the pushing one, because I wanted to know how exactly I should be pushing, especially for my pelvic floor health, because I knew that was a really big thing postpartum was your pelvic floor, and I was worried about it. So I took both of those webinars and I thought they were super helpful. I also did y'all's online course, the workout course, the kind of workout as you go or whatever, however many workouts you want to do each week. And I thought that was really helpful because I have an at-home gym and I like to work out on my own, on my own time. And so I really enjoyed doing that. It was definitely helpful for pregnancy.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to support you. And you actually don't live very far from us either, which is always cool to connect with people that are within a reasonable driving distance from us.
I know. It's so crazy. I really wanted to make it out to the gym sometime, but with work and everything, I could never make it.
Yeah, it is a good drive for folks in your town. So how was the end of your pregnancy and kind of the workup towards your birth?
It was good. The end and everything, it was fine. I had a doula. She was really helpful. She was with Central Carolina doulas here in town. She was great. She knew my plan and everything. We had typed out a birth plan. So I felt ready. I felt like I knew every scenario that could happen. And I felt excited just because of the hypno babies course that I was doing and doing all the breathing and all the exercises. And I felt like I could get myself to relax pretty well. The end was fine. I was excited, but it did drag on toward the end, which I'm sure you guys can understand.
So when did labor start? How pregnant were you?
I was actually right at 40 weeks. It was on my due date. It started. It was crazy.
So Victoria gave birth like 2 days before me. We were probably in labor at the same time.
Yeah.
And I was 41 weeks at 3 days.
Yeah. 41 and 3.
So tell us your birth story.
Yeah. So it was actually my birthday the day before I was due. So I was due the day after my birthday. And I was doing everything to try to go into labor because I didn't want to get induced. My husband is in the military. And so we were seeing people at the military hospital. They were doing my care and everything. So I was going to give birth there. And they had already scheduled an induction at like 41 weeks. So they're like, okay, if you don't go by then we're inducing you. And throughout all the research and everything I had done, I was like, I don't want to be induced. That's the last thing I want to happen. I mean, even if it did happen, it would be okay. But I was trying to avoid it. So I was doing all the things, the mile circuit, eating the dates, the red raspberry leaf tea, all the things that I don't know if they actually work.
All the things that don't work.
And the last thing I did was on my birthday, I made this eggplant parm recipe that I had found online. It was like labor-inducing eggplant parm. So I made that. I had that for dinner. And so I always say that like, that's maybe what had me go into labor.
Honestly, you're not the only person for eggplant parm.
Really?
For my first, I had eggplant parm.
No way.
It's all the fresh basil, apparently. You just gotta
A basil or
put an entire basil plant on it.
We did put an entire basil plant in the sauce.
I mean, absolutely. There's so much that goes into it. There's like pounds of cheese that you put in.
Yeah.
And crushed red pepper. Like there's so much. Anyways, I went into labor that night. I think it was like 1 a.m. I woke up with contractions. Yeah, they woke me up and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm having contractions. I was excited.
Was it obvious to you that they were contractions?
Yeah, it was like nothing I had ever felt. I was like, okay, this is different. Definitely. And so I went back to sleep for a little bit, maybe, I don't know, 20 minutes or something. And then they kept waking me up. So then the other reason I knew I was in labor is because I had to go to the bathroom. I know that's like definitely a sign of labor. So I was like, okay, my bowels are empty now. I'm in labor for sure. And so I stayed up and I kind of just labored downstairs and I was using my Hypnobabies techniques to try to relax, which I felt like was helping pretty well. And then Hypnobabies has a timer you can use. So I was using that timer on my phone during my contractions. I mean, I felt like things were going fine. On my timer, it would say that I was having contractions for like 45 or 50 seconds. And it was like every 3 minutes for a while. And so I texted my doula and I was like, I mean, I don't know. This is my first time in labor. I mean, maybe I should go to the hospital. I don't know. And she was like, okay, well, why don't you guys go? And she said at WAMEC, though, they don't always like to admit you unless you're like clearly about to give birth at the military hospital. So she said, go ahead and go. And if they admit you, I'll meet you there. If not, let us know. And so I was just convinced that I was like fully in labor and like, I don't know. I was like, oh man, like, wow, this is it. Like, it's only been a few hours, huh? Which was odd to me because I mean, it's not common. I don't know. All the birth stories I heard, people are in labor forever.
I mean, it can happen. It's not unheard of. But if you were talking like that, it's probably, I could see where this is
If you're texting, probably good to stay home.
Oh, yeah. I was able to do that. I was like, Yeah. So anyways, we get there and we go to triage. The contractions were pretty painful. Like I was doing my Hypnobabies techniques and I was trying to stay calm, but I was definitely vocalizing and they were uncomfortable. And so they get in there and they check me and I was fully waiting to hear like, oh, you're at least, I don't know, 3 to 4 or whatever. They were like, you're 1 centimeter dilated. And I was like,
Crushing.
I went through all of that. I mean, it was only 5 or 6 hours, so it wasn't that long. But still, I was like, this is intense. Like, this is uncomfortable. This is painful. And I was like, 1 centimeter? Seriously? They were like, yeah, so I think you might be in prodromal labor. So kind of before, like, the real thing happens. And I was like, this feels real though. Like, this is intense. This is very uncomfortable. I cannot sleep.
Gosh.
And they were like, yeah, that, sometimes is how it is. And so they're like, we're going to send you home. And I was like, oh
Savage.
my God, no. Yeah, good luck. Be on your way. And I was like, oh my God. Just so uncomfortable. Still, I mean, they were probably like every 4 minutes at this point. Not like a full minute long, but still maybe 45 seconds each. So we go back home. I try to rest. I can't because, again, just very uncomfortable, very painful. Pretty much labored like that the whole day. Didn't really get a break. I feel like a lot of podcasts I've heard with people in prodromal labor, they say that like at night they're in labor for a little bit and then they get little break, like maybe during the day or a few hours or something. But I didn't really get a break. So the most like break I got was kind of like contractions might be every like 10 minutes during the day. But they were really strong and they hurt. And luckily my husband was home. He wasn't at work or anything and he was able to support me. But it was really uncomfortable. It hurt a lot just the whole day. And so by that next night, I was still having them. Maybe they were like every 5 minutes or something. And so I talked to my doula and I was like, I'm in so much pain. Like maybe I'm further along now, like than 1 centimeter. And she was like, why don't you go back and see, since you feel like you're in a lot more pain and they're almost unbearable, go back and see what they say. So we go back, they check me again, 1 centimeter again. And they were like, we can give you this prescription for hydroxyzine, which I'm a veterinarian and we use hydroxyzine as like an antihistamine at work and like itchy dogs. And it might cause like some sleepiness in them. And I was like, hydroxyzine, okay. And so they were like, maybe it'll help you take a nap. And so I was like, okay, whatever, I'll try anything. So we get the hydroxyzine, I take it. I'm so tired, but I absolutely cannot sleep through my contractions. Like I could sleep for maybe like 3 minutes, wake up, have a contraction, go back to sleep for 3 minutes, wake up, have a contraction. Just really, really uncomfortable. Hypnobabies was still going okay for me, but I was having a really hard time. So kind of did that all night, really didn't get any sleep, maybe a couple minutes here and there. And so I touched base with my doula the next morning, kind of told her how everything was going. And this time, let's see, I think she came over that day to kind of help me and walk me through some different positions I could do with the birth ball and maybe try to get baby to like move down a little more, because every time they checked me, they were like, oh, he's at, I think positive stations mean they're higher up, right?
Oh, it's opposite. Minus station is higher up. Yeah.
Minus. Okay. So I guess every time they check, they're like, oh, he's at a -3 or whatever. I'm like, okay. So she helped me with different positions and just like through contractions. And I felt like that was okay. And then so I go through the whole next day. And then that evening, again, I was just like, just couldn't do it. It was just so unbearable. It was so painful and uncomfortable. And she was like, okay, maybe you should go in, get checked. And if they say you need to go home, ask for maybe like some morphine or something to do like a morphine nap, because some people do that. And so they checked me. I was like 2 centimeters this time.
Progress.
And I was like, can I get something? Right. 1 centimeter progress. I was like, can I get something to take like an hour nap? Because at this rate, like, I don't know how I'm going to make it to 10 centimeters being this exhausted. And so they were like, yeah, we can give you some morphine. And so they did that. I took a little, maybe hour and a half nap, which was great. And my husband was still there with me, doing great, supporting me and everything. So I felt a little bit refreshed. And then we went back home for a little bit, and I actually had an appointment. This is now the next morning. So I had an appointment with WAMAC to check me. It was like my 40-week appointment. And so I went in to see the doctor, and I had been seeing a midwife every time at WAMAC. I requested to see a midwife each time, so I had met most of them. But this time, I guess the midwife was busy. And so I saw an OB, and she checked me, and she was like, wow, you're 4 centimeters. And I was like, oh, amazing. And she was like, how far apart are your contractions? And I was like, 5 or 6 minutes right now. And she's like, I think you should go up to triage and get admitted, hopefully. And I was like, great. So I went up and they checked me again. I guess I was like, I don't know, a 5 maybe or something. And so they said they would admit me. And usually they said they don't admit people until they're like 6 centimeters, which I felt like was intense. I mean, that seems really intense to me, but every place is different. And I guess they have a lot of patients and they don't have that many beds. So they can't just admit whoever all the time. And so when they checked me that time, though, I think they accidentally broke my water because maybe like, I don't know, 2 minutes later, my water broke everywhere. And things were really intense, like more intense than before, really uncomfortable, still trying to do hypno babies, but almost like giving up with that because I'd been doing it for like 3 days at this point.
Only so much hypno babies you can take.
I know. I would at first I would have the background music playing on like one of my headphones. Like I just had it in my ear the whole time. And they would be telling you what to do, like relax, drop your finger, close your eyes, da-da-da. And I'd listen to like every track and I just, yeah, I was still trying to stay calm though, but it was pretty painful. And yeah, they finally admitted me. And I did say at that point, because I was so exhausted, my body hurt, I just was not having a good time. I wanted an epidural. And my doula was like, are you sure? And I was like, I'm very sure. I definitely want one. Like, I mean, this whole time I had planned on not having one and I was going to stay strong. But at this point, 50 something hours of labor, I couldn't do it anymore. And I felt fine about my decision. I mean, I was a little bit disappointed, but I was like, at the end of the day, I need to relax a little bit before actually birthing, like the birthing part comes, and maybe I can even take a nap for a couple minutes. So I got my epidural and that was fine. I mean, it was hard, but it was fine. And then we got our room and I took like a 15-minute nap or something, which was great. And then they came in and checked me and I was at a 10. And they were like, if you feel ready, you can start pushing. And I was like,
Did you say a 15-minute nap?
yeah, maybe 15. I don't know.
So you went from 5 centimeters to 10 centimeters in like 15 minutes.
It was longer than that.
Oh, okay.
Were you shaking the whole time?
Went from 5 to 10.
No, definitely not. I mean, it may have been longer. I don't know. Time is like, you just don't know what's happening with time when you're in labor. Like, absolutely, you're in your own land. So
It's magic.
I don't know. Maybe it was a longer nap. I mean, honestly, it felt like 15, 20 minutes. So however long it was, anyways, they came and checked me, said you're at a 10. If you want to start pushing, you can. I think, though, when I was taking a nap, I do remember my doula had me use one of the peanut balls and lay on one of my sides to get him to move down a little bit more. And that was really helpful. And I said I wanted a few more minutes before I started pushing. Then a nurse came in and I tried to push a little bit, but I couldn't feel anything because of the epidural. And so they were like, we can turn it down some. And I was like, great, let's turn it down some so I can feel what's happening. Because when you can't feel anything, I'm like, I don't know if I'm doing this hard enough. Like, do I need to push more? So they turned down my epidural and that was really helpful just to like feel him kind of coming down and know what was happening. So yeah, that part was fine. It was exciting. It maybe lasted I feel like I maybe was pushing for like 30 to 40 minutes. And then when Rowan was born, he aspirated meconium. And I guess when my water broke before, I don't think there was any in it because they checked it. But it was like all over his head and everything. So then when he came out, they weren't expecting it. So they had to call the NICU in. And in my plan, I wanted time with him on my chest. I didn't want the cord cut for a while, like 5 to 10 minutes at least. And of course, they had to like rush everything because he aspirated meconium. So he was on my chest for maybe a few seconds. And my husband still got to cut the cord, but it was like I don't know, 30 seconds after he came out. And then they took him away and they took him to NICU. So that was pretty tough, not getting to have that time right after. That was really hard for sure.
So how long did he have to stay in the NICU after that?
I think it was about 2.5 or 3 days. So I gave birth at night. It was 7 something at night. And so after I cleaned up and everything, they wheeled me down there to see him in NICU. And that was really hard to see him. I don't know if you guys have had a baby in NICU before, but just like seeing your newborn laying there with like all the tubes in them and everything and their IVs in, like I looked at him and I just like started sobbing and I was like, I just can't, I don't know, I can't look at him right now. I mean, this is so hard. So I stayed there for a minute and then they took me to my room where I could rest. But I was doing fine and everything, and he was improving each day. The NICU doctor was amazing, and he explained everything to us, and he was like, he's doing really good. So by day 3, he felt good enough to send him home. So, yeah, so it wasn't very long that he had to stay in there.
Do you have any tips for someone whose baby maybe goes to the NICU for a few days? I don't know if you were breastfeeding or anything that you kind of did to help with your guys' bonding and then also like supporting breastfeeding.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was breastfeeding. And so the first thing I did was pump some. And I had never done it before, but luckily my doula was there and she was really helpful. So she showed me how to do everything. So I got some colostrum and was able to give it to him, which was great. So yeah, I guess just like getting acquainted with pumping and getting to spend time with your baby in NICU, of course, that's the best. But I would say that's really the only tip I have. You just kind of have to roll with it. But they were great in NICU because they wanted us to come every couple of hours. So like every 2 or 3 hours to feed him. And I got to breastfeed him, which was great. So every couple of hours I would go in and do that. So they were really supportive, which was awesome.
Did you guys get discharged at the same time or did you get discharged and then like a day later he did?
Yeah, so they discharged me after 2 days or whatever. I don't know, a day and a half or something. But they said I could stay in that room. I just wouldn't have a nurse, which was fine.
Yeah, less interruptions.
And just so I could be, yeah, exactly, less interruptions. So I could be close to him. And so, yeah, he was still in the NICU, but we were able to stay in that room, keep that room for an extra day while we waited for him to get discharged. So then we could all leave at the same time.
So did they discharge you straight from the NICU? They didn't like bring them over to postpartum for like a day or so before discharging?
He did, actually. They did bring him over for a night. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We did one night with him. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. I forgot about that. We did one night with him, and he did fine in our room.
So how was it transitioning home after he had been in the NICU for a little bit? Were you nervous at all? Or do you think it was the same amount of like, they gave us a baby that I have to take care of, how nerve?
I think it was the same amount of like, yeah, like they gave us a baby. They think we can take care of him. And we were clueless. We're like, I don't know what to do. Like,
yeah, every parent.
Yeah, absolutely.
What were some like really positive aspects of your birth that you hope to like recreate in future births? Maybe not the length of it, but
Definitely not the length.
What were some things that you really pulled from that you were like, I really loved that part about my birth?
Yeah. That's a good question. I would say doing the hypnobabies techniques helped a lot. So if I ever did it again, I would practice that a lot more before birthing and just honestly do that the entire time. But I felt like that was helpful and made it a little bit more positive. Another thing was having a doula. That was super helpful, especially as a first-time mom, first-time birthing person. I mean, I really didn't know what I was doing, and she was super helpful. So she kind of made it a little bit more positive for me, especially when you're in that negative headspace, when you're in labor. And yeah, she was super helpful. And let's see, what else? I feel like those are two of the biggest things. I tried to kind of overall look at it as a positive experience, even though it wasn't the experience I wanted or I had hoped for. I feel like it's okay that it was like that. And it's okay to not have like a great positive birth story, and it's okay to kind of grieve that experience that you were hoping for and just give it time.
Yeah.
Yeah. To process it.
So how did you feel about your postpartum? So you had your birth and then your baby was here. How was afterbirth?
It was a struggle. Yeah, it was really tough. I feel like I struggled pretty like immediately after we brought him home. He was just like a really colicky and a really fussy baby. And at first I was like, oh, that's normal, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I've never had a baby before, but everyone I talked to, they were like, oh, babies are fussy, And I was like, okay, this must be normal. But he was just always crying. And breastfeeding was really, really tough because he would latch on and then like cry and scream, come off, want to eat some more. Like it was just basically just like a screaming fest. 10 minutes and then finally he would eat a little bit. It was all a big struggle. Yeah, it was really hard. So I can go into more detail if you want me to. But overall, postpartum initially was hard. And then it was hard for like probably 4 months. And then it finally slowly got better.
So what helped it feel better for you? Or I guess what were you kind of thinking when you were starting to have these issues with breastfeeding and your baby is like making a lot of like crying a lot? Like how were you feeling through all that?
Yeah, I was feeling so overwhelmed and I was almost like triggered by his crying. It was like, I wasn't like upset triggered, but I was like, I have to fix this now. Like he would start screaming and I'd be like, oh my God, like what can I do to fix it right now? And I would just like try everything I could. And I just felt like no matter what I did, he was just always crying. I think I had mentioned before I had a doula and I didn't have, this is one mistake I made. And if I have another baby, I will definitely do this, but I did not have a postpartum doula. And so I regret that. And I will absolutely have a postpartum doula next time. But I reached out to my doula because she had checked in like maybe a week after, like a week postpartum, she had checked in and come over and just kind of been like, hey, how are you doing? And I was like, I'm struggling a lot. And she had recommended a lactations consultant and IBCLC that I should maybe try to go to and see if there was anything else going on, why he was so fussy trying to breastfeed. And so I went to see a lactation consultant. They said that they thought he had a tongue and a lip tie. We got that fixed and maybe it helped a little, but it wasn't like a night and day. Like it wasn't like, wow, this helped so much. He eats great. He still was really fussy all the time. And he still was fussy when he was eating. And after he got the tongue and lip tie fixed, he didn't want to take a bottle, which was okay because I was home and I didn't have to go back to work for a pretty long time, like for the foreseeable future. But it made it a little bit more, I guess, more stressful for me because I felt like I could never leave him with anyone, even my husband, because he wouldn't take a bottle. So I'm like, if he gets hungry in an hour or two, what if I'm not here and he needs to eat? So I felt like the lactation consultant was helpful, but all in all, I didn't really feel like the tongue and the lip tie, getting them fixed, helped a whole lot.
With the tongue and lip tie, did you get any body work done on him or just the release?
Yeah, we got a lot of body work, maybe 3 sessions. I feel like that may have helped. I don't know. It's hard to tell. I guess it was hard to tell for me because I was with him 24/7. So I could like maybe see tiny little changes, but I didn't see him like from week to week. But we had to do like 1 bodywork session before the release and then 2 or 3 after. And then also the lactation consultant showed me how to do the different stretches in him, which I felt like helped a lot just with his development in general. But yeah, we did do a lot of body work and they said he was really tight everywhere. So maybe that was part of the issue too with him crying when he was eating.
What strategies did you use to help you whenever you were getting a little overwhelmed from like the crying?
Yeah, that's a good question. at first, I just like didn't know what to do. So didn't really use any strategies at first. I felt like I just had to just get through it. And so I would just sit there and just hold him while he was screaming or walk around for a while, like for hours while he was just screaming and screaming. At one point, I bought earplugs on Amazon because it was so loud and I just like couldn't deal with it. But even when someone else tried to help me, I felt like was like doing him a disservice by like having someone else help, or doing them a disservice because then they're holding the screaming baby and they couldn't do anything about it. Even my husband, like when he would hold him for more than like 5 or 10 minutes, he would cry. And so I would just take him back. And so I felt like I was doing it all on my own, but I didn't know what else to do. At one point, I did reach out to a postpartum therapist at the same place where my lactation consultant was. It was maybe a little bit helpful, but unfortunately, it wasn't as helpful as I thought it might be for me, because I think I was just kind of at a point where I needed more than just talk therapy. We did a lot of like exercises and like, where do you think your anxiety is coming from? What do you think you can do to help your anxiety? And I think I just needed a little bit more than that. So to me, during the sessions, it would be helpful, but then I couldn't take anything away and like use it when my baby was screaming because my anxiety was at an all-time high and there was just nothing that was helping it. I didn't really have that many good coping mechanisms, honestly.
And that's totally fine. We're all on our own journey.
No, that is really rough, that because I was hoping that you were going to say that you went to this therapist and she gave you all these like really great strategies to help you like mentally walk through this stress. And so I'm like sad to hear that that didn't happen. I'm like, gosh darn it. Like,
I know. I really wish that had been the case. Yeah, that would have been great.
So how did you begin to overcome the postpartum anxiety? Was it just he kind of grew out of it and just wasn't crying as much and you guys just kind of grew together? Or did you figure out something to help you through, or figure out why he was crying so much?
Yeah, I think it was a couple of things. So the biggest thing for me was I got on medication for postpartum anxiety and depression, like an oral medication, a daily oral medication. And that was the biggest help for me. It took about maybe 2 weeks for me to see that things were changing, but that definitely helped a lot. And it was at a point where my husband, he's in the military. I think I mentioned that before, but he was leaving for 3 weeks and I just like didn't know what to do. And I just felt like I was like in a hole and I really needed some help. So I reached out and got on a medication for postpartum anxiety, or for anxiety in general, actually. But it was super, super helpful for me. And I kind of felt like I was getting like a glimpse of myself back on it. I was able to handle my son's screaming a little bit better. And not get as like overwhelmed all the time. I wanted to actually hang out with my friends again and be more social, whereas before I was like a clam and I didn't want to do anything. I didn't even want to like go to my friends' houses. I didn't want to go and talk to my neighbor. I was just worried about my baby screaming all the time. And so definitely the medication helped me a lot just to like kind of feel normal again. And then of course my son kind of outgrew his colic, but it did take time. I feel like by maybe 3.5 to 4 months, things started to improve, and then definitely improved like every month after. I could tell a difference. And then finally by like 6 to 7 months, he wasn't really as upset all the time anymore. And I think it also is just part of his personality. He just is a loud guy. Like he's 14 months now. And I definitely know when he wants something. He's very loud, and that is just who he is right now.
It's fine to have opinions. We try to remind ourselves of that whenever our kids have really strong emotions. Like they're allowed to have an opinion on emotion things.
Exactly.
But it's hard.
Exactly. They have an opinion.
What would you say to somebody who's kind of teetering on the edge of like wanting to go on some sort of medication to help with postpartum mental health? Because I know that there's sometimes some stigma about going on medication and trying to do all the things you can to not get on it. And this is not me saying that I think that was a bad decision by any means. It sounded like it was the perfect decision for you. But I know there's stigma involved with it. So what advice do you have for somebody who's maybe kind of struggling with that, with making this decision?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I kind of felt that way before as well. I felt like there was stigma around it. And I thought that I needed to try all these different things and do everything I could to not have to go on medication. So I feel like I tried so many things and nothing was helping my anxiety. I feel like it was at a point where I really needed more than what I was doing. Yeah, I finally just broke down and tried it. And for me, it just made a huge world of difference. I still am on the medication and it's improved every area of my life. I'm just feel like I don't have anxiety anymore. But I also am a person who I am aware that I did have generalized anxiety before I had my son, and I never got on medication before that. I felt like I could try to handle it with like talk therapy and other things before I was even pregnant. So I've noticed that I've had anxiety for a pretty long time, like maybe since I can remember, like since grade school. It was definitely amplified postpartum. So I finally got to a point where I was like, I have to at least try medication. But for me, it was such a positive change. And I really encourage anyone who's like teetering on the edge of like, do I try it? Do I not? I would say definitely try it because it can make a world of difference for your mental health. And I think that's so important postpartum. If you're struggling a lot, like for me, I was like, I'm going to do what I can to be the best mom and wife and, who I can be for my career. So for me, the medication really has helped decrease my anxiety a lot in every area of my life. So I would encourage people to try it. If they feel like they're thinking about it, I would definitely give it a shot.
I don't know if I've actually heard a story of anybody who's gone on medication and they've been like, oh, wow, that was a mistake. I feel like most
people are like,
I feel like every story I've heard has been like, it changed my life. It was exactly what I needed. Like, I wish I started it sooner. So it always seems like it's a really positive thing for folks and it's something that's available. And so I'm glad that you took the step to get the medication that did help you tremendously postpartum. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share both your birth story and your postpartum story, because sometimes I think we skip the postpartum with all of these birth stories, but the postpartum could be just as impactful. And I want to thank you for your bravery of sharing that you're even on medication, because I know some folks again, there is that stigma with it, but I think it's really important to normalize that this is something that happens to a lot of people. And medication can definitely be the thing that like truly impacts your life in a positive way. So thank you so much for taking the time to share both of those stories with us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you for joining us today and listening to this episode. If you want more support throughout your pregnancy, join our prenatal fitness programs and childbirth education courses. If you need more support after birth, join our postpartum fitness programs and education courses. If you are a professional, we offer birth worker and fitness trainer courses, so you can learn from us while earning CEUs. You can explore all of our courses on our website at mamastayfit.com, and you can use code STORY10 to save 10% off all of our programs. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow our podcast to be notified when we release new episodes. Please leave a review and share with all of your friends, families, neighbors, literally anybody you meet. If you love it, share it with them. We release new episodes every Wednesday and new birth stories every Friday.